Morning. How many of you are the kinds of people who you already have your Christmas decorations set up? Okay. You're loved. Okay. God loves you. You're welcome here. But I don't get it in the best way. And here's why. I love Thanksgiving. And personally, I have been offended and affronted by entities such as the Home Depot. Yes. Come on, somebody. All right. Yes. October 13th. I go to the Home Depot. They still got the werewolf up. You know what I'm saying? I'm like putting my little baby next to it. She's going to get scarred by this thing. And right next to the giant werewolf is Christmas decorations. And like a lot of them, okay? We're talking like a ton of Christmas decorations, just packed with Christmas. It's October 13th. We didn't even get our Halloween thing going down. And then we roll into November and it's like people are playing Christmas music. God bless you. But dude, Thanksgiving is still a holiday, right? Right? Okay, thank you. So 11:30 service, you're on it today. The last two services were asleep. Come on. Thank you. Listen, guys, I was a little frustrated. But here's why, man. I love Thanksgiving. I love looking forward to Thanksgiving because I get to eat a lot and not feel guilty, okay? So I didn't feel very guilty most of the time. And until one moment when finally, the year was 2019, I became a real adult. I did. I became a real adult and I hosted my own Thanksgiving. And when I say I hosted, I really mean my wife did a lot, but I did contribute, okay? I made something. And here's what we did. It was Thanksgiving 2019 and we had all the youth leaders over, okay? So we got a bunch of hungry college kids because we would rather practice on them than our real parents. Amen, somebody? Okay. We're not ready for that. And so we get them in there and we get all this stuff going and man, we cooked up a storm. Some people brought some food. My wife got on YouTube and was like, how to cook turkey and because millennials don't ask their parents for advice, right? That's not what we do. And so we're YouTubing, we're getting it all dialed in. We get the turkey and it came out just perfect. And then I had just read this stupid book called Genius Foods. And it's not worth the read, but there was a recipe in there and it involved kale and onions and chili flakes. And I was on my health journey, so I was about it. And I got this big bag of kale to serve up the youth leaders. Some of you know. And so I get the big bag of kale, I put it in the pail, and you know what happened to it? It just all shrunk down. I was like, I got the biggest bag of kale that they had, and now I've just got this little bowl with my caramelized onions and my chili flakes. And so I still was very proud of that. We set out the spread. The tables were set. There were candles. There were little fairy lights. Okay, we had little fake leaves. We went all out for this thing. And by the time it was done, we sat back. We had moved furniture back in our little apartment, and we reflected on the night, and we were like, we did it. We could totally do this. And then it was like, I had this flashback to being, I don't know, let's say 14, but it was probably 21. And I had this flashback of sitting at my mother's table for Thanksgiving. The turkey comes out, I take a bite, and the following sentence comes out of my mouth. It's kind of dry. Okay, well, the good news is all of you in here have more emotional intelligence than I did at 14 or 21. So I'm proud of you. We're making some progress at a church. But I was like, I felt the need to repent in that moment. Because if somebody had hated on my kale, I don't know what I would have done, man. I was committed to that steamed kale with onions. You know, it's funny. Thanksgiving is something that people put so much work into, and we don't even know it sometimes how much really goes into it until you go to do it yourself. And you know, the idea behind Thanksgiving is this idea of gratitude, right? It's a holiday about being thankful for things, and sometimes it gets polluted with all this colonial imagery. But the idea of Thanksgiving comes from the Bible. It comes from giving thanks to God for what God has done. But the problem is sometimes when it comes to our life, there are little enemies to gratitude that sneak in. They steal our gratitude and they get in the way. One of the most common ones is consumerism, right? When we start to develop that palate, that critical ideology, and then we end up thinking that we deserve better. That's an enemy to gratitude. Another enemy to gratitude is the ego. It's the self, the importance, the thinking, oh, I deserve whatever's been given to me. And the last one is kind of a sneaky enemy to gratitude. It's this idea of giving. Like, I give and I serve, therefore I deserve. It's an enemy to our gratitude. Really, when it comes to our relationship with God, some of these things can kind of sneak into how we relate to him and how we relate to others. But the reality is this, is that none of us have done anything to deserve the grace that has been given us. We've done nothing to earn it, nothing to deserve it. And so the only sensical response to that is gratitude. And that gratitude is based on grace. But I don't know about you, but there are so many times where these little enemies sneak in to my ideology of who God is and what he's done. And I find myself like wanting to make the call for him. I find myself saying, I don't know if I would have done that, God. And what that is that's an enemy to our gratitude. And it steals the joy that we're designed to have because of the grace of God that is on display. You guys, today in the text, I'm really excited because we're going to talk about this exact idea. This text is a pivotal text in the history of the church, okay? Martin Luther, 1500s, he's a Catholic priest. He was like really committed to being holy, really committed to confessing his sins and to teaching others to do the same. He's teaching this text at his seminary, comes across this exact paragraph, and this is what ignited for him the idea of the Reformation. He was like, I've missed it. I missed it the whole time. I thought I could be holy. But the reality we're going to see in this text today is we are not holy. God's holy. He's the just and the justifier. We don't add anything to the equation. And that's actually good news, because if it was up to us to add to the equation, it would go sideways. And so here's what happened in the text last week. We see that the law gives us the knowledge of sin. It helps us to understand what the standard was and how we fall short of it. But today we get to have the knowledge of grace, the knowledge of what Jesus had done through his righteousness. Here's what the text is about, okay? It is the righteousness of God that we heard about in the Old Testament is now on full display in the person and work of Jesus. None of us are better than any of us, and all of us fail to measure up to God's perfect standard. The good news is that God has made us right with him through Jesus so that everyone would know that our standing with God depends on faith alone. It's faith alone. Faith in Jesus is the only way to get right with God. Maybe you didn't know that you needed to get right with God. That's the perennial problem of humanity. We need to be right with God. Faith in Jesus is the only way. And that leads us to live a life that is divine by grace-based gratitude. That's what it's about. That's what we walk in. That's what we have. So we're going to, come on, Diamond, you're with me. We're going to get this right into chapter 3. Let's get it. But now, the righteousness of God has been manifested apart from the law, although the law and the prophets bear witness to it. The righteousness of God through faith in Jesus Christ for all who believe. For there is no distinction, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And here's where the good news comes in, and are justified by his grace as a gift through the redemption that's in Christ Jesus, whom God put forward as a propitiation by his blood to be received by faith. This was to show God's righteousness. Because of in his divine forbearance, he had passed over former sins. It was to show his righteousness at the present time so that he might be just and the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus. Man, this is good news. It opens with good news. It says, but now. You want to see that in the text, okay? Whenever you get a fat list like we've had in Romans for the last few months of all the ways that we sin, all the ways that we've missed it, we're just waiting for the but now, right? We're like, say, okay, we get it, Paul. We're really messed up. Okay, we get it, pastors at Vintage Grace. We're really messed up. Okay, here's the good news. You hung on long enough. You should give yourselves. Okay, we're here though. We're here. This is the good news. But now, the righteousness of God is here. It says it's been made manifest apart from the law. This is the righteousness of God, you guys. It's bigger than just a legal statement. It's bigger than just a you're in or you're out. The righteousness of God is both how right God is and how holy God is, but it's also something that when we understand and we live in it, it leads to the flourishing of our communities. Get this, the righteousness of God, when you see it in the Old Testament, the word is Sadiq, okay? And so what it meant was that the people who lived according to God's rule and God's reign and God's kingdom, around them, life flourished because kingdom values lead to human flourishing. When you're honest, because God's called you to speak the truth in love, that leads to human flourishing. When you seek forgiveness or you call others to forgiveness or you lean in and love, that's human flourishing. When you bear one another burdens, like it says at the end of Galatians, that leads to the flourishing of those around us. You guys, the righteousness of God is not so we can be a holy huddle. It's to make a difference in the world so that people would see that God is exactly who he said that he is. This is the righteousness of God that's been manifested apart from the law. It's what we're called to. And so that law and those prophets, they were given to us so we would know how bad it really is. The law, they're referring to the first 5 books of the Old Testament. That's the books of Moses. In there, we see God's standard of perfection of what it means to live a perfectly holy life. The prophets come along and they enforce the law. So think of it this way. God gave the standard. We totally messed up. So he had to keep sending people to remind us about the standard. Okay, that's what the prophets are. If you read the prophets, that's what they're all about. They're like, hey, Israel, you're kind of missing it. This is what truth is. And that each one, time and time again, calls people to live covenant faithfulness with God, to live in accordance with what he's called us to do and what he's called us to be. But now the righteousness of God is made separate from that, meaning we see how right and how true God is without having to follow all 613 commands from the Old Testament. We get Jesus' righteousness. And it says that we get it through faith in Jesus Christ for all who believe. It's by faith. Now, faith in our world is kind of a weak word. Oh, I just have faith, which kind of amounts to I have some sort of weak hope that this thing is going to happen. I heard a great analogy from a guy named Brant Hansen. He's an author, podcaster, and he was talking about this idea of faith and how faith really just means to trust. Faith is trust. Now, for some reason in church world, we use faith like for all kinds of soft things like, hey, we're going to be Faith Community Church. You know, Faith Legacy Church. Like it's this soft word and we just got to have faith and have faith in your parenting, have faith for God. And then when it comes to something that people really care about, like their money, you don't go to a bank that's called Faith International Banking, right? I'm not giving them my money if they're Fidelity Faith. That's no, they don't get my money. You want it to say Fidelity what? Trust, right? The trust. I'm giving my money to a trust. I'm not giving to faith. So, but this thing that we're talking about here, this issue of faith, it's no different. It's the issue of trust. It's something that you can stake your life on, that you can risk your life for. It's this issue that is so much bigger, and it's the thing that we actually need to solve. We actually need to solve getting right with God, but it comes down to trusting God. When you entrust your money to a bank, that's a vote of confidence in that institution. When you trust your life to God, that's that vote of confidence in what he's done for you on the cross. Because that's the picture that's painted here of faith. It's not this soft, light thing. It's a all in, your whole life committed to God, even though we fail and even though we missed it. You see, this idea of the law and the prophets and the righteousness of God, it's tethered to this idea of a system. There's a quote, it's attributed to a handful of different people, but it says, every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. Here's what that means. Bad food in, you know what happens, right? When you eat bad food, Kat's laughing right now. It's okay, you know. She eats like chicken and Brussels sprouts every day. I don't know how she does it. But when you eat bad food like me, I'm just like, it results in bad things, right? But that's because the system of my life amounts to the impact of what's happening, right? All the little pieces of it, what I eat, what I do with my time, how much I sleep, what I do for fun, it all builds up into what makes my life. That's the system of it. So if your life is tough, it's your fault. I'm kidding. Mostly. Here's why this is encouraging, okay? Some of you are like, man, life's been tough. Eat better. Okay, listen. But here's what you need to hear though. If that's true, if this system that we operate on is what's leading to the results we're getting, that means if you tweak something in the system, it's going to change the results. That's good news. That's the good news here. The system of works righteousness from the law and the prophets was not working. He knew it wasn't going to work. That's why he gave it to us to show us what we were going to miss. But the system that works is faith through Jesus. It's a change in the operating system. It leads to a different result, which is a grace-based gratitude, not guilt-based gratitude. It's because we have a gift that's been given to us from who Jesus is and what he's done. As this is the change in the system that we need, is this kind of righteousness, this kind of life. But here's the problem. Everybody in here, we fall massively short of the standard. incredibly short. Like it's not even funny how short we follow the standard. In fact, I'm going to steal this illustration from the great theologian Andrew C. Soderstrom, which is it's our lead pastor's name. It's okay. Hunter, can you come up here for a second? Okay, this is Hunter. Say hi, Hunter. Hey, yeah, all right. So Hunter, he's a great guy. He's a good guy. He's on our youth staff. He's a good dude. Hunter plays basketball. For real, you almost went D1, man. You're about to hit the West Point. You got the plyometrics, you know what I'm saying? He gets out there and he gets height, my friend. He can get some height on the jumps. I've seen this man soar from like the round thing at the basketball thing. It's incredible. And so I'm getting better. At sports, guys. Me, on the other hand, I'm somewhere around 230 something. I got 6'1" though, so I'm like, we're right about the same height. But my vertical hasn't changed since I was 11. But why don't we just have a little competition here? And you and I are going to try to see how high we can jump. Okay, we're gonna see how high we can jump. Yeah. Oh yeah, I'm gonna go first. The last two services, the guys could barely jump. He can actually jump. So sorry, Jake, if you're in here. So we're gonna try to jump, but here's the standard. The goal is the moon. Okay, just gonna as close to the moon as we can get. Here we go. I'm gonna go first. Count to 3, and then you're gonna. Okay, ready? You guys with me? Ready? 1, 2, 3. I worked on that. That was 3 weeks of squats. You know what I'm saying? Okay. Now let's count down for Hunter. Let's see what he can get. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Go have a seat. That was great. I wasn't ready for that. Okay, so you guys are applauding, but I wanted it to be clear. He still failed. Okay? He failed. I don't care if he can do a backflip. The moon is way out there. He's not remotely close to the moon, with all due respect. He can't do a backflip. I was not ready for that. This is great. It plays in the analogy. It doesn't matter how many backflips you do, okay? We all are sinners. We are. And here's the reality is that the standard that's been set is so astronomically far from who we are and what we're capable of that it's embarrassing. The gap is so far. It says all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. If you don't believe me, here's just one example of sin, okay? You guys heard of social media? Okay, there you go. I actually have a real story for you. Okay, so I was listening to this podcast and the great Mark Zuckerberg was explaining how the algorithm works. And here's what's really interesting. The way these social media algorithms work, like some of it definitely tilts you a certain way to get you upset. But I don't know if you've noticed, but the algorithm is based on AI, artificial intelligence, which means the algorithm is not tearing us apart. We are tearing us apart. We like that stuff. We like the things that enrage us. We like the things that make us angry, that make us want to fight, and that make us divisive. It knows we like it. It knows you're going to click. It knows you're going to comment. It knows you're going to share. I'm just saying, it knows what we like. That's just one example, but we have a proclivity toward these things. Our heart is inclined toward evil. We just have to look at our social media feeds for an example that we lean toward some of this stuff. But we can also just look out at the world around us. There are so many things that go wrong in our society where we wish we could change it. We wish we could make a difference. We wish somebody would just stand up for it. There are so many things that are horrible in this world. And if we're honest with ourselves, there are plenty of things that are rebellious within our own hearts. There are plenty of things which we would be ashamed to say in public about ourselves. You guys, sin is the ubiquitous problem of the human race. It's everywhere. It's in all of us. But at the end of the day, although we fall short of this, although we miss this, the good news of the gospel is that we have been justified by his grace. Amen. We've been justified. God's made a way to make you right with him. And what that means, here I like to think of it this way. It's cheesy, but just go with me. Justified is like just as if I never sinned. Okay, so if you spell it out, there we go. So you spell it out, it's like justified just as if I never sinned. And so here's what this means. Someday when you go to stand before God, if you've been justified by Jesus, if you've put your faith in him, you're going to come with your list of everything you've done wrong. And he's going to look at you, and God is not going to see your list. he's going to see Jesus's list. And Jesus's list is blank. It's empty. It's clear. It doesn't matter how much guilt or how much shame you're carrying today, how much guilt or shame you're going to have in the future. Justified means it will be just as if you never sinned. That's the gift of God's grace to you, is that you will be holy, 100% holy. It's like a pass-fail game, and you're going to get the pass no matter what if you've put your faith in Jesus. You, if you've put your faith in him, are as holy as you're ever going to be. You're as righteous as you're ever going to be. I'm just saying. What I mean by that is you can't live up to the standard that God has set. You're already as holy as you're going to be. So now what you do is we live from this place of righteousness. It's called imputed righteousness. It means God takes his righteousness and gives it to you. So it's your new identity that he sees you with. He only sees you as holy because of the work of Jesus on the cross. It's not because you deserved it. It's not because you have a refined palate and you know what God needs to do. It's not because of you just existing that you deserved it. It's not because of what you can give to God. It's only because he has justified us, just as if we never sinned. And then we live from that place. This is a gift. It's a gift to us. So then we live from this place of grace that's been given to us, and that looks like redemption happening in our lives, right? So you all know that you still sin, right? Okay, because I still sin, you still sin, but before God, it's just as if we never sinned. But in our life, there's this process that we're all a part of where the righteousness of God that has been imputed to you is going to continue to leak out of you in your life. It's when God starts to do the internal work of heaving the sin that has taken root in our lives that we start to live in accordance with his righteousness. It's a whole different game. It doesn't start with trying to be good or trying to behave. It starts with recognizing how bad we are, how good our God is, and that's what flows through to righteousness and the flourishing of our communities because of what he's done, not because of us. That's why it's a gift. We didn't earn it. It's a gift that we could never pay back, not even remotely close to paying back, which is why it says this word right here in verse 25. Now, this is a word that some of you guys, you're like, or somebody say propitiation with me, right? Propitiation. Okay. This is your $60,000 Jessup education working for you right now, okay? You guys you're learning some theology today, and that's a good thing. And here's why. Propitiation is a very important word. It's very important because it ties back to the issue between us and God. If you look at the beginning of the Bible, the moment that mankind chooses to live on the throne of their own heart instead of letting God live on that throne, the payment for that was blood. God slaughters an animal in front of them and then clothes them with the skin from the animal. He makes them clothing out of it. And talk about God's provision right at the fall. It says that he gave them clothes that were better than their own clothes, the fig leaves that they had. He at that moment, he pays for their sin and clothes them in his righteousness. It's a beautiful picture of what he's eventually going to do in Jesus. But before we get to Jesus, there's this bloody history of the people of God where the only way to pay for our sin is called a blood economy. Blood is the symbol of life. It's the symbol of what is within us. And so what God does, he says, okay, sin equals death. Sin will cause death in your life, death in the lives of those around you. It causes a death in our relationship. And so the only way to make that right is through the essence of life. And so that's why the sacrificial system is inaugurated. And they use these sacrifices to pay for the sins of the people. People would offer them for themselves. And every year, or one time of the year, they would offer one sacrifice for all of the people of Israel. Now, where they would do it was on this thing called the mercy seat. How many of you guys have seen Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark? Okay, those are the only good ones. Don't watch the new ones, but the old ones were great. And if you know that story, there's this thing called the Ark of the Covenant. It's a real thing from the Bible. Moses, he's told by God to put the 10 Commandments in there, and that inside this ark, they would carry the people and the law of God, and above the ark, the presence of God would reside on this earth. Here's what that meant. They took these cherubim with like wings, and they fashioned them to put their arms like this and like this, so it kind of had a gap over the top of the ark. It was supposed to be empty. Nothing sat there. That emptiness represented the throne of God. That's the mercy seat. That's where the word for mercy seat comes from. It's a picture of his throne in heaven surrounded by angels. And what they would do every year on the Day of Atonement is they would come in and they would take the blood of the unblemished lamb and they would sprinkle it on the mercy seat. They would sprinkle it right there on the throne. And that was to say, God, we're paying for our sins. Would you receive this sacrifice? The exact phrase used for that mercy seat is what we see here for propitiation. What it's saying is that Jesus is the blood of the lamb sprinkled on the throne. He's the one who comes to pay for all of our sin. And it's the appeasement of the wrath of a God. That's this idea of propitiation. Jesus appeases God. He atones for our salvation. He makes us at one with God because of his sacrifice by his blood. Guys, this is good news. This is the whole new system that we needed that wasn't going to work. Like if we were still giving sacrifices, it wasn't going to work. What we see in the book of Hebrews is it says that there's no longer any need to give sacrifice to the throne because Jesus is the great high priest who is the perpetual sacrifice. The word propitiation shows up again in the book of Hebrews saying this is the final end all be all payment, which is a exclamation point saying to us, works righteousness will never amount to anything. There's no way you can earn this. God had to do it himself. When we get to heaven and we're sitting with God, there's no way we're going to be able to say, hey, look what I did for you. No, we're going to look at him and say, man, look what I did to you on the cross. And what God's going to say when he looks back at us is, you know what? I did this for you. I did this for you. He sacrificed his own son so that you and I would have a right relationship with him. That's the picture here of what it means to receive the propitiation by his blood. And the only way to receive that is faith. The only way is faith. It's not by doing anything. It's not by having life figured out. It's all faith. But this faith in Jesus is good news because it reorients our entire life. It actually makes it so that we have faith and meaning and purpose. You know, there's this, there's a lot of science that's going around on the study of flow. Okay. So flow states, it's like when you're like really engaged in something and you feel like you're just knocking it out, like you're made to do it and you have this feeling of transcendence. It's called flow. Okay. And one of the things that they found about a flow state is it's really hard to get into a flow state if you're thinking about yourself. They said your prefrontal cortex is still involved when you're thinking about yourself, and it actually stops you from entering into flow, entering into this like feeling of, oh man, I'm doing what I was made to do. Do you know what beats this self-centered ideology? The only way to get around it that scientists are finding? It's having a transcendent purpose, AKA God. It's focusing your intention and your being on God. If we're focused on ourselves, we can't hit this thing that we were designed to feel when we're doing the thing we are made to do. God designed you to feel his pleasure when you do the thing you're made to do. But if it's focused on us, it falls short. Science is just catching up to some of these things that God has taught us, that like he is the purpose of this. He's what we're aiming at. And so when we have that aim, we don't get bogged down by being focused on ourselves. Guys, how good is God for wiring us that way? It's incredible. And so he does this for one reason and one reason only. It's to show his righteousness. It's to show how right he really is. It's not because you're great. It's not because I'm great or that I deserved it. It's to show how right God is. And he did it in two ways. Number one is he did it by having his divine forbearance pass over many sins. That means that he didn't take the wrath that he deserved to let out on sin. Instead, what he did is he held back. And 1 Peter tells us the reason he holds back is because he wants as many people as possible to respond to him. That's why he hasn't just blown this whole thing up. He still wants us to respond to him and his truth and who he is. And so he holds back. But also, his righteousness is put on display in the present time because of Jesus, so that Jesus would be the just and the justifier of the one who has faith in him. As this gift of faith, this just and justifier thing that God does, it's based on the fact that he alone is right and he alone is good. And because he is right and he is good, he can make you right. He's the only one that can make you right with him. It can't be us. And when he does that, the experience that we have on the other side is true joy, true fulfillment, true happiness. I was hanging out with my barber the other day, and it's been a long-term pray-watch relationship. His name is Ryan, and we were talking, and he said he finally got to this question. He's like, hey, so what exactly is it that you do? I was like, that's good. I've been wondering the same thing. What exactly is it I do? And he says, what exactly is it you do? I was like, well, I read this church and I help with the youth group and teaching and whatever. And we just really believe that people are looking for their happiness in all kinds of places. Like they're looking for it in their career, their kids, their marriage. They're looking for it in their job. They're looking all over the place. And we just think that at the end of the day, none of those things are going to fulfill what they're looking for. We think they're going to be more happy in Jesus. And he was like, huh? And just keeps going. Cool. So anyways, But that was an opportunity just to be like, hey, so here's what it's about. Here's what it's about. There's actually more joy in Jesus than anyone else this world has to offer. And what that looks like is I saw an ad the other day. I was this ad campaign. And let me tell you some of the words that were in it. You guys, you're going to love this. Okay. It had the following phrases, and it was referring to this certain product. And here's what it said. Happy, alive, whole, makes you come alive. And I was like, that's kind of redundant. That was already in the ad. But do you know what they were referring to? They were referring to travel. Travel. Travel makes you happy. Travel makes you alive. Travel makes you whole. Travel makes you come alive. No, travel makes you broke. Travel's not gonna do it. You have to go home when you're done. You don't get to just live in the sand. Come on, that's not your house. That's not your condo. Okay, that was an Airbnb. That looked like, what's it called? The desert thing, I don't know, the kids are into that. The Joshua Tree, there we go. It's all Joshua Tree, desert chic, whatever. It's not your house. You have to let it go, right? The reason you love it so much is because you're not working, right? Unless you're working on vacation, which we can talk about that later. You still got to go home. The travel's not going to do it. The things that we think are going to do it aren't going to do it. It's not going to fulfill you. The only thing that's going to fulfill you is this thing we're talking about right here, faith in Jesus. That is the only thing that's going to last. The only thing that's going to make you happy, alive, and whole, and make you alive again, okay? Like, they stole my content, all right? I'm mad at Marriott. We're going to have a conversation with them. Can you imagine we just sent a bunch of letters to them? Like, Marriott? Okay. Here's why I'm telling you guys this. The faith that we can have in Jesus, the faith that he calls us to have in him, it leads us to a life that is redefined, that is repurposed towards a grace-based gratitude. It's based on grace. It's not based on what we did, what we can earn, what we deserve. It's based on the grace that God has given us. And so here's a few things I want you guys to think about just as a result of this text. As we meditate on it today, as we walk through it today, a couple things. Number one is this. God is more right than we know. He's so much more holy than we can understand. He's right about everything. It's not a single thing he's not right about. And because of that, we know that we are more wrong than we could ever know. It could be hard to stomach or hard to swallow, but the reality is none of us are even remotely close to what God's standard is. We did not make the Thanksgiving dinner, okay? We had nothing to do with it. It's God who prepares the table before us. It's God who invites us to the table. It's God who feeds us. It's his meal that he's provided. We do nothing. We bring nothing to the table. We're more wrong than we know. But only faith in Jesus can make us right with God. That's the one thing. The one thing is going to make us right with him is faith in him. And because of that, we have gratitude. We can be grateful. We can look at our life and I know that there's real things we face. There's real suffering we deal with. There's real shame. There's real guilt. There's real pain that we're going to encounter. It's not about if trials come, it's when trials come. We will experience it. But what we know is true about this reality, about the just and the justifier who's made you right with God, what we know about that is that we can weather any storm. I would rather go into the hardest times of my life with a sense of confidence and peace in the one who owns this whole thing than go into it with some kind of new age, speak it into existence mentality. If I just say enough good things, it's gonna happen. No, it's not. I don't want to go into this thing just thinking, okay, well, suffering's horrible, but I have to make the most of my experience on this earth, and so that's what I'm gonna do. That's not, how are you gonna make the most of it? It sucks. Like, what you need is Jesus to come in and say, no, there's hope on the other side. This can be redeemed. This can be used for good. And that is the difference maker. It's not any of these other ideologies that the world wants to throw at us. It's the gospel alone. We're more wrong than we know, but what I want you to hear today is you are more loved than you can imagine. You are so much more loved than you can imagine. It's love that compelled God to do what he did on the cross. It's love that drove him to do that so that we would know there's no other way to be right with him than what he did for us on that cross. And so because of that, we get to live with grace-based gratitude. Guys, I love you. Would you stand with me? Let's worship together for this hope that we have. We have a hope that the world doesn't have, and that's why we bring it to them. And so let's worship and let's meditate on this hope that we have in Jesus.